Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining the GBSN for Energy Transitions virtual series, Powering the Energy Transition, A Tale of Two Hemispheres. We are thrilled to kick off the series with today's event, Part 1, Setting the Stage. And we have an engaging and informative discussion with leaders from both academia and industry who will help set the stage for our series, looking at the energy transition journeys in the global north and south. Just a few housekeeping reminders. This session will be recorded, so please keep your microphones muted. Feel free to drop comments and questions in the chat at any time, and we will do our best to address them at some point in the conversation. Lastly, we invite you to use the chat to introduce yourself and where you're joining from. If you'd like to say a few words about the interest that brought you here, please feel free to add this as well. Please note, for any questions, please enter them into the chat. All audience questions will be addressed at the end of the moderated discussion. Any questions that we don't have time to answer will be shared with the speakers after the event. And my name is Juliana LaBelle, and I'm the Member Engagement Coordinator here at the Global Business School Network. The Global Business School Network is a nonprofit organization that partners with business schools, industry, foundations, and aid agencies to improve access to quality, locally relevant management education for the developing world. Our impact communities are member-led initiatives that exist to facilitate business school collective action for societal impact. The impact communities foster the sharing of ideas, best practices, and resources across schools and other participants in the GBSN community on a range of topics. It is my pleasure to introduce Greg Bean, one of the chairs of the GBSN for Energy Transition Impact Community. Greg is the director at the Gutierrez Energy Management Institute at Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. Greg has over 30 years of global oil and gas management consulting experience in the upstream, downstream, midstream, and oil field service sectors. He has served international, independent, and national oil companies, leading numerous projects, including major corporate business unit and capital investing strategy assignments, as well as organization restructuring efforts. Prior to his consulting career, he spent 5 years with ExxonMobil in refining and supply and trading functions. And I would like to pass the mic over to you, Greg.
Great. Thank you, Juliana. Appreciate it. And welcome to all of our participants. This is the first activity that we are undertaking as the GBSN Energy Transition Impact Community. This is a community that we're forming to further the understanding of the impact of the energy transition on all of the business schools that are part of the GBSN network, and more broadly, all of the countries that they represent. It's been founded by 3 university champions. The University of Houston, which I represent in the Bauer College of Business, the Wits Business School, and our in Johannesburg, and our 2 champions there. You will get to meet both of those today, are Lwazi Negubevana and Maurice Radabile. And finally, our 3rd founding school is the Rotterdam School of Management, and is represented by Sarah Craig, who's the program manager of the Energy Transition program, and Yasser Giassi, who's the associate professor in the Department of Technology and Operations Management in the Rotterdam School as well. So I have just a couple of stage setting slides, which I'd like to cover before we get to our guest speakers. I can do that. And this is the first in a series of 6 webinars on powering the energy transition, a tale of 2 hemispheres. I think it's helpful to take a step back and just think about, what are the drivers for this transition? What is it that has made this so critical? And I think we can look at the starting point of this as being the UN's Sustainable Energy Goals. There are 17 goals that are very broad and cover all aspects of human development, but there are several important goals, sustainable energy development goals, that are related to energy. And you can distill that into 5 things. And these are the things that are really driving the transition. They are the big challenges that we are going to have as an energy industry over the next 30 years, and are the subject of what we want to be speaking about in this series. First is energy access, providing affordable energy services to the world's current population and a projected nearly 10 billion population in 2050. Also, security, provide uninterrupted supply of energy. Obviously, climate change is a huge driver, with a goal to reduce produced greenhouse gas emissions to 1.5 degrees C or less, temperature rise above the pre-industrial level, reducing air pollution of energy use, and also reducing other adverse effects and ancillary risks associated with energy use, be they water use, land use, waste, or other things. So if you take a step back and you say, well, okay, to really achieve those goals, what are we really going to need? And this is a way that we've been kind of thinking about it in terms of really 2 things that we need. One is we're going to need a number of completely new low carbon energy value chains. We're going to need low carbon electricity value chains from generation all the way through to end use and the equipment associated with that. Carbon capture, use, and storage. How do we, to the extent that we continue to have fossil fuels in the energy mix, how do we capture and either sequester or use that CO2? Low carbon hydrogen. Hydrogen, it looks very promising as an energy carrier alongside electricity. And so we need a substantial low carbon hydrogen value chain. And again, that means the entire value chain, thinking from production through infrastructure to end use. And then 2 others, advanced biofuels and low carbon synthetic fuels. Again, other value chains that could have a major role in a low carbon energy world. So those are the kind of assets that we're going to need. We're also going to probably need some new markets. We're going to need commodity markets for sustainable energy commodities. So markets are likely to decommoditize to some extent. Purchasers of energy commodities and services are going to be interested in what are the legacy life cycle environmental impacts of those products that they're buying. So we're going to need changes in the market structure of how those commodities are bought and sold. We're obviously going to need a lot of infrastructure support and services associated with that. A lot of that has to do with the midstream transmission distribution. And also a big part of accelerating this transition is by governments applying various credits and subsidies to try to accelerate investment in these areas. And ultimately, we expect to see a market develop for trading in these environmental instruments to facilitate more rapid investment. So that's the kind of scope of what we're talking about. And this series is really focused on exploring different elements of the energy transition, those things that we need to do. Today is setting the stage, so talking about kind of overall the different perspectives around the transition and how it might occur in different regions. The next one will be on repurposing legacy assets. We clearly have, huge investment in legacy, particularly fossil fuel assets. A key accelerant of the transition will be to the extent that we can repurpose some of those to clean energy. Technology developments, very important, especially in those new value chains. For us in the GBSN, we're very interested in skills and development and business education. What kind of new capabilities and knowledge and skills are business school students going to need to help facilitate this clean energy future? Obviously, regulatory environments. And then at the end, how is this going to be financed? We're talking about trillions of dollars of new investment over the next 30 years. And how is that likely to happen? What are the options there? And I think the unique thing about this series is our focus on looking at using the different lenses of both the global north and the global south. I think we all observe that the challenges and the pathways forward are very different in North America than in Europe, than in Africa, Middle East, Asia, Latin America. And so we're going to be particularly focused on highlighting some of those different perspectives, hence the title, the focus on global north and global south. So with that, I will turn it over to Maurice and the main program.
Colleagues, I have to apologize. Prof. Khadeb has just had a power cut. So he is trying to reconnect, but I think in the meantime, I will get started on the introductions, if that's all right. And then he can take over once he comes in. So we've got 4 speakers today. And first up is NJ Ayuk, who's the executive chairman of the African Energy Chamber. He's an internationally acclaimed thought leader, a lawyer, thinker, speaker, and entrepreneur. And he advises major companies on corporate strategies with their focus primarily investing on Africa's future. NJ, by frequently advising African national and international oil companies, financial institutions, the public sector bodies across sub-Saharan Africa, has contributed quite a great deal in the creation of thousands of jobs across the continent and the building of strong domestic capacities across the energy value chain. When NJ is not speaking and advising business in Africa, he is found with his 3 children and his wife, Kelly. NJ, do you want to come up and say hi to everybody?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lwazi. It's an honor.
Welcome. Also, we've got Behan Koch. Behan, sorry, just give me a second. Behan is Executive Director of Business Development at ENGIE, North America. He's responsible for leading his team that looks primarily at product innovation, deal structuring, commercial origination, and providing subject matter expertise and advisory to commercial and industrial clients regarding tailored renewables, sustainability, and energy transition solutions. So I think, you know, we couldn't be more blessed to have someone of his caliber joining us today. Behan is also an adjunct professor for the MBA and executive MBA programs at the University of Houston at Bauer College, where he teaches innovation and commercialization courses as it relates to sustainable energy transition.
Yeah, finally got
it. 20 years.
Thank you very much.
I see Prof. Khadeb is back. I'll hand over.
Sorry, we had an energy security issue here in South Africa. Yeah. We had a load shedding, and sorry, Lwazi, how far were you? Shall I
was still introducing Behan.
Burhan, okay. So great. Have you introduced the NJ already?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Burhan, thank you very much. He's currently Executive Director of Business Development at ENGIE, North America. Burhan is responsible for leading his team that primarily specializes in product innovation, deal structuring, commercial origination, as well as providing subject matter expertise and advisory to commercial and industrial clients regarding tailored renewable, sustainability, and energy transition solutions. Burhan is a well-learned man, MBA and executive MBA at University of Bauer. If I can read all his CV, it will take a long time. So I'm going to stop there, Burhan. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Maurice.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. And Dr. Ramanan is the Chief Energy Officer and Vice President of Energy Innovation at the University of Houston. It's great to have you here. And prior to this current position, Dr. Ramanan is Vice President for Research and was a Vice President for Research and Technology Transfer. And it's great to have you here. He also serves as a chair of Colon College of Engineering and Chemical Molecule Engineering Department. Very learned person in this space. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, great. And then I think it's Loazi. Loazi is my colleague, director of African Energy Leadership Center, and the lead at the GBSN Energy Transition Impact Community. Loazi is driving our Energy Leadership Center here at Wits Business School. The main mandate is to develop the next generation of leaders in the African energy sector. And we've got 3 pillars here. Basically, is providing executive education, postgraduate qualifications, and PhD in energy leadership. Again, he's got a very long CV. If we go on, it will take all our time. And I'm trying to save time here. Now, we're going to get into some discussion, which basically the whole idea of this is powering energy transition. But it's a tale of 2 hemispheres, as Greg might have indicated, the global north and the global south. Our pacing, our pathways are different, and we need to acknowledge that. And I hope this meeting is going to highlight those differences, but also highlight commonalities and also highlight where we are going, because we all know that low carbon economy is where we're going, but how we get there could be very different. So the speakers that are going to be leading us in that discussion, the order, I'll give you 10 to 15 minutes to give you a perspective. We'll start with the practitioners, and then from there we'll come with academics. Practitioner from the north, Buran is going to start, and then from there NJ will come, and then from there Loazi will come, and then Ramanan will come. So over to you, Buran.
Thank you, Maurice. If you don't mind, could you repeat the question once again? It was just breaking up just for a moment as you were going through the questions. I want to make sure that I can address it correctly. I apologize.
Well, the real topic that we want to talk about is powering the energy transition is a tale of 2 hemispheres. So you're representing the Northern Hemisphere, and basically the perspective of the Northern Hemisphere. NJ will be representing the perspective Southern Hemisphere in this whole journey, this pathway towards low carbon economy or net zero, and we want to hear these 2 different perspectives. Am I clear with the question?
Yes, thanks, Maurice. I appreciate that.
Okay.
So certainly it's a lot to digest in terms of what we want to cover today, and then the areas that we want to touch on. But I'm going to share basically insights from ENGIE's perspective naturally. Working for ENGIE, it's a global renewable energy company. Maybe I can start with a little bit of how we got to this point in terms of our story to be a part of this sustainability puzzle, if you will. I will say up until 2015, ENGIE, I think represented to be a traditional utility company. Well, we have a lot of power generation, LNG business, a lot of infrastructures across the globe. I will say that it kind of represents like a typical traditional utility business model. But I will say 7-8 years ago, ENGIE made the decision to go fully into this sustainable energy transition journey. So we went through a portfolio transformation. We divested a lot of power plant generations. We got out of LNG business. We got out of a lot of the capital intensive infrastructure business, and we wanted to deploy same capital into this new emerging technologies we think is going to be the pillars of the new energy world, if you will, or the future of the energy world. With that, essentially, we invested that back into wind development, solar development. We already had a pretty good presence in the hydro, and I think that continues to be the case in Europe, particularly. Investing into battery storage, and recently more and more investment towards hydrogen. So I think what I wanted to paint here, the picture that I'm trying to paint here, is that in the context of this energy transition or taking steps towards this sustainable world, there's a lot of areas to cover. There's a lot of bases to cover. So as ENGIE, we're trying to do our part in terms of investing into those areas and bringing those technologies to life in a way that's still economical, in a way that is still consumable for the customers, right? I will say it's not going to be an easy task. I think it's going to require more than just companies like ENGIE and some of our competitors who had the similar, I guess, bet or business model change, I should say. And I mean, I see a lot of companies, investing into the same philosophy. We have RE100 kind of initiatives that is going on. And I believe it's more than 200 or 250 companies who are already signed up with RE100 initiative. Essentially, the idea is that they would like to be 100% renewable in terms of their scope 2 requirements, and they would like to be able to say they are offsetting their energy consumption to run their operations by securing renewable supply, right? So these are, again, some of the initiatives that we are seeing within the corporate world. Another one is science-based target initiatives. A lot of companies are signing up with that initiatives to be able to demonstrate that they want to be a part of this because I think they're taking the climate change seriously for various reasons. Probably could be that they truly believe that the climate change is happening, or that they're feeling the pressure from their shareholders and customers or customer base, so that whatever their motivation might be, they are making those business decisions to invest into this type of energy transition, sustainable energy initiatives. And we also see, in terms of, I guess, North America, particularly, we see a lot of initiatives coming from also non-corporate entities, cities, states, and some of the towns that are basically making their pledge towards 100% renewable. So they have plans to get there in over the next 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. But the idea is that over time, how can we get to a point where we can say that any energy requirement to be able to run this city or run this town is going to be provided by renewable sources, right? And so this is, of course, more than just building wind and solar projects. It's a lot more than that. So sometimes, how can we bring the generation closer to where the customer is, so that we don't continue building this capital-intensive centralized power plants in the middle of the country. And in order to bring that energy to where it's needed, now we have to spend even much more money, billions of dollars, on the infrastructure, whether it's transmission lines or distribution lines or pipelines, to be able to bring that energy from that centralized location to where it's needed. Right. So there's also a lot of initiatives stemming from both corporations and non-corporate kind of federal entities in North America, where they have this decentralized the initiatives. We call it behind the meter initiatives also, essentially having maybe solar and battery at the customer site, or bring in backup generations or CHPs to where the power is needed, so that you eliminate the need to spend that money towards that centralized infrastructure need, right? And you can deploy the same capital towards even bringing more renewable sources to the system. So I wanted to just kind of cover the landscape in terms of what's happening in North America, or what we are seeing in terms of trends towards this energy transitions and sustainable energy, as well as some of the things that ENGIE has been, I guess, investing into as a corporation within the same context. Maurice, back to you.
Very much. Thank you very much, Buran. I think we've got the global north perspective, particularly the work that ENGIE is doing. So let me allow NJ, are you to go south? perspective in this whole journey towards these transitions. And over to you, my brother. Get the sound.
Here we go. Professor, thank you very much. It is an honor to be here. I think these discussions started with we seeing what most Africans are going through today. Professor couldn't introduce us because he had load shedding.
Yeah.
Lights were off. And that is the issue.
Yeah.
That is the issue for Africa. Africa's most industrialized country, South Africa. It's going 8 to 10 hours without electricity. The most industrialized nation in this continent that can really drive manufacturing and create jobs and use our great inter-Africa free trade agreement right now to generate a lot of manufacturing across Africa. 600 million people around this continent have no access to electricity. 900 million have no access to clean cooking technologies, most of them women. It is not just a luxury issue, it is a human rights issue. We are not addicted to fossil fuels. We understand fossil fuels are the cheapest, most abundant, most available energy source for us to drive up Africa. Africa today stands with a lot of young people looking around the continent, 75% of the population under 25, and looking at around the continent and not having any hope. The only hope for them stands at, do they have to cross the Mediterranean or the Sahara to go into Europe to search out for opportunity? Do they have to become engaged in social unacceptable activities to be part of our continent? No. Oil and gas, coal, still needed in our continent. If renewables, as most people in the global north says, are the way to go, Germany would not have engaged South Africa to take its A-grade coal to power Germany, while South Africa is in the dark. They can print money. They spend so much money to save their economies during the COVID, and they didn't care if we didn't have vaccines, but they could have spent so much money to put solar panels everywhere on every rooftop in Europe. Fossil fuels have driven, and especially gas, has driven Western civilization, Western economy, extended human nourishing, hospitals and everything came from this industry. Is it the right time for Africa to abandon its natural resources in the hope of getting aid? Where we stand in Africa, we know the only thing that we're being told right now is that we need to wait on aid that is going to come from Europe or coming from the global north in order for us to have renewables. But here's the problem. After the Kyoto agreements, they promised $100 billion in climate mitigation funds. $1.3 trillion was supposed to have been paid to developing countries today. Those funds never came in. Those funds never came in. 1.3 trillion. So you want people to wait for aid? The idea that we have to wait for aid for energy when we have abundant sources within this continent that we can really develop. And I've been lucky in this journey. I was very lucky to go to COP26 and COP27. But right after COP26 in Glasgow, they flew in there with their private jets, and all these rich people were telling us in Africa, don't do anything with your natural resources. Leave it in the ground. Don't eat meat, and don't drink milk. If you drink milk, drink almond milk. And then the next 2 months later, Germany started building LNG terminals, started reopening coal mines. The United States opened all federal lands for drilling. A month ago, the United States approved an $8 billion drilling program in Alaska. Other drilling programs came into Norway, 52 licenses. The UK opened first coal mine in 30 years, 200 licenses. Then you turn to poor African countries like Namibia, like South Africa, like Nigeria, and Mozambique, and you say, leave your gas in the ground. But the gas that you have that is already up, we need that gas to power Europe. How do you think a young girl in Mozambique would see the gas leaving their country on LNG ships going to power Europe when they are in the dark in Africa? And you tell them that that is climate change, when your greenhouse gas emissions are bigger than ours. We have 2.73% greenhouse gas emissions in Africa. Take out South Africa and Egypt and Algeria, the most of Africa is 0.5%. And you're telling it's like telling the skinny kid in class to lose weight when the fat kid keeps eating. The global north and wealthy nations, they need to decarbonize while Africa needs to industrialize and needs to industrialize with its gas. We need to industrialize with our resources. This is not the time to abandon our fossil fuels. Less than 2% global investment into renewables has gone into the African continent. Gas today is declared green for Europe, but it's not green for Africa. With that kind of hypocrisy, how do you talk about a just energy transition or climate justice when someone unilaterally declares gas green for one set of people, and for poor people, gas is not green? But then let's look at it. I heard my good friend from NG talk about investing in hydrogen and Tesla. Most of the hydrogen deals being done in Africa is you take green hydrogen from Africa to Europe. Same thing like you saw with the fossil fuels that we all complain about. And you know, we're not going to be able to do, you can't sell someone the pipe dream of a Tesla when they have no electricity. Climate change and energy poverty are two sides of the same coin. They have to be dealt with both. And this can be done well. And how do we fix this? We can fast track on how we walk away from coal or slow down on coal, but not now, because with 8 hours a day with no electricity, you need coal. That's just what it is. And you cannot rely on intermittent energy sources. Base load, people, base load. That's what we need right now in Africa. We need baseload energy. Europeans and Americans can walk away from fossil fuels because they already have baseload. They can introduce fancy solar or wind. We have nothing. Where are we transitioning from? From the dark to the dark? You can't breathe clean air in the dark. Nobody wants that in Africa. People want lights and they want baseloads. We have to we have to ask the tough questions. But Africans also have a role to play. We have to create an enabling environment. We have to cut red tape. We have to be able to drive up and move up contracts and move up projects. It is inconceivable that with abundant gas in South Africa, you cannot get your gas resources right into this country and solve an electricity crisis. It's inconceivable that we cannot build pipelines across the continent to be able to drive this. I like watching movies, and I end with this. Batman is not going to do this for us. Superman is not coming. Wakanda Forever is a great movie, but the Black Panther is not coming. Africa would have to do this ourselves, but we would have to use our own resources to drive this up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and Jay. I like your style, very straight talk, and it's very good to have you. Now, we've heard the perspective of the practitioners, Buran and NJ, and then Lwazi is the academic from the Global South. So, Lwazi, over to you.
Thanks, Prof. I feel like I should maybe stop my conversation here, because I think NJ has covered really everything that we have found in our research, looking at the issue of the energy transition on the continent, particularly in South Africa. I think there's one key message that keeps coming up, and that's the issue of justice. And of course, you can unpack this, into many facets. And I think top of that list is the issue of energy security and access. NJ has already spoken about, 600 million Africans with no access to electricity, 900 million people with no access to clean cooking. And so what Africa really needs, and this is coming out across all the studies, is that we need access to modern energy. And it's become quite clear that, if we transition recklessly to a low carbon economy, we will be in a situation where we've put our energy security at risk. And one of the key things also that has come out is that, unfortunately, and then when you look across the world, uptake in renewable energy hasn't translated to lower energy prices, especially at the household level. So this is something that keeps coming up whenever we're having conversations, whenever we're looking at research locally. And so it's very, very important that as we transition to renewable energies, that we don't jeopardize access and security to energy. And if anything, our transitioning should be working such that we are improving the current situation. You had load shedding just as as this conversation started, and I could give you many examples. I mean, our colleagues at BAO, for example, could tell you when I was giving a lecture sometime last year, same thing happened, and then we're talking about energy. Same thing happened. The lights go out, and this is a very, very difficult situation. And so our transitioning should definitely not be exacerbating the issues of poverty and inequality. And speaking of equality, I think NJ already alluded to this, that you look at the global north, they continue to plan and to invest in fossil fuel infrastructure. And at the same time, they're discouraging investment in the south. And this is huge hypocrisy. And at the same time, they're also now starting to do what I feel is, building up trade barriers. And I think if we're being honest, I think the World Trade Organization needs to look at this because I think mechanisms, like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, they're actually looking to punish developing countries because developing countries are not going to be able now to trade with Europe, at least not on a fair basis anyway, without getting punished for continuing to use fossil fuels. And this is a huge problem and poses a huge risk, I think, to the developing world. And this is also happening, within the context of historical emissions. Already, NJ alluded to, we're still emitting much, much less than the North, 3% circa there. And quite frankly, our research is pointing, to the feeling on the ground in a way that those who are responsible for this damage should be paying for it and not expect developing nations to be carrying the burden of historical, emissions. Another key thing that has come up, Prof, is the issue of finance. Now, there's a lot of talk, firstly, that the promises at the different COPs haven't been met. But secondly, even the funding that has become available. Firstly, it is shrouded in great secrecy. And this is a concern of citizens. Why the secrecy? And secondly, when you start to sort of pick away at what this financing looks like, you find more than 95% of that financing is actually loans. Now, you are issuing out loans to countries that are already struggling to pay off loans that they currently have. So where is the justice in that? And yes, they get sugar-coated and get called concessionary loans or whatever. But fact is, it's still a loan. And you're still expecting, that you're going to get a return on that. And on top of that, a lot of this financing has conditions attached to it. Things like making sure that project development and all sorts of technical support actually comes from the global north. Now it starts to look like nothing but extraction, and this is really not helping developing nations. And also another key thing that has come out is around finance is the issue of transparency. Within South Africa, for example, there's been huge criticism of how the energy or the just transition framework was built up and the JETP funding, that it's not clear where the finance is going or how the priorities were decided upon. It's been hugely criticized, for being an elitist document that's really not involving the population. And I think this is becoming, a problem across the continent and not just in South Africa. And this is something that really needs to be addressed. Also, I think coming out of our research, one of the important things that really sticks out is the issue of natural resources. Yes, we've got, great sunshine, we've got good wind resources, we've got some hydro and some geothermal power. But the question is, when we're transitioning, are these natural resources actually going to be to the benefit of the people? Or is it just going to be, once again, extraction from the continent? So our people going to be involved in the full value chain, from R&D, IP generation to the processing and the manufacturing. And at this point, it is not happening. So we are now exporting our raw natural resources and we're importing the final product, which once again looks at, it starts to look like extraction. And you ask, where's the justice in that? And so there's been huge calls for making sure that our minerals are beneficiated locally. And that can be seen actually as, I think, as an opportunity for the continent to industrialize. But of course, we can't do that on the back of renewables. So if we are going to industrialize and be able to beneficiate the minerals locally to build for this future that's the lower carbon future, we have no choice but to exploit all our natural resources on the continent. But also another key thing that has come up quite a lot when it comes to the discussion on natural resources is the ownership of these energy assets. It's well and good, we can develop locally, but if we don't own these assets, again, it's extractive. If we don't own the land that these assets are built on, it has become a problem for the continent. Of course, there's also a number of other things that do come up, things like jobs in the fossil fuel industry. In South Africa, I mean, just the coal industry alone is said to employ well over 110 or 120,000 people. Those are the direct jobs in the industry. And then if you think of the multiplier effect, all the dependents and all the other businesses that rely on this fossil fuel industry, you're talking a huge number of jobs. So as we transition, we have to find ways to protect those current jobs. But also not just protecting the current jobs, but we need to be looking at creating new jobs for the lower carbon future. And this will require a lot of things, which will include things like making sure our energy policies are in line with our environmental policy, because it is no good for a country to go and commit to a certain reduction in our national determined contributions when the country's energy policy doesn't speak to that, or the country's industrial policy. And of course, also very importantly, along with that will be the issue of education, training and skills development policies. Because again, you don't want to be producing hundreds and thousands of young people out of education and training institutions, and they can't be absorbed in industry. And also that the energy policy doesn't work to the skills that are being developed. So that is something we need to be very careful of. NJ also mentioned, I think, the importance of or the impact that energy poverty has on women and youth. And this is something that has come up quite a lot, quite strongly in our research. That energy injustice really does affect women and young people in particular, because young people are the future, and they have to be involved in these conversations and really crafting and determining their own future. And of course, like I said, women have to be involved not only as consumers of energy, but also to be actively involved in policy making. They have to be involved in business, to help uplift our communities. And I think finally, the issue of the agenda itself, the transition agenda, the pathways. The Global South absolutely has to own, its own agenda. We have to determine our own timelines. and it cannot be that it is influenced by global policies. And also, very importantly, is the issue of real and meaningful consultation with the people. I've mentioned, South Africa's just energy transition framework has been criticized for being elitist, and unfortunately, this also goes against the very principles of that document. In particular, when you look at things like procedural justice, where talk about nothing about us without us. And unfortunately, the way that the JETP funding now has progressed has absolutely left everybody behind, except for those few who happen to be in the right places and in the right spaces. So I think in closing, really, I think if we are talking about the energy transition, in particular, if it's going to be a just one, there are three key tenets, and these are actually a foundation of South Africa's just energy or just energy transition framework, and it speaks to distributive justice, it speaks to restorative justice, and finally on to speaks about procedural justice. Thank you very much, Prof.
Very much, Lazi. Truly appreciate your contribution. I'm going to move now to the last speaker before we get into questions and a dialogue. Ramanan, representing the academic perspective from the global north. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so very much to have me as a part of this conversation. A real pleasure to be here. Maurice, I'm not sure how I be the next person after these wonderful conversations we've heard from our colleagues in the Global South, both the academic as well as the industrial contributions. But I'm going to try and tell you what we think from the University of Houston, and give you some perspective on the way we think about the energy transition, and perhaps sort of a slightly different viewpoint than what you would hear from others in the US. And so I've got a few slides. I'm going to just use that to sort of drive the conversation, if you're okay with that. If it's technically challenging, I will stop using it without a problem, and certainly can talk about it without the slides. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into the future of energy. As you see, I'm the VP for Energy and Innovation at the University of Houston. And part of what I wanted to highlight here is, and this is really where the issue stands in our opinion. Energy is a human necessity, and we must make sure that energy is reliable, affordable, and sustainable for all. And I think this is somewhat of a cliched statement, if you will, that when we think about energy, this issue of the trilemma, trying to address reliable, affordable, and sustainable, starts to then really address the question not about the specific solutions, but the principles behind the solution. For too long, the conversation always hinges on whether it is fossil or whether it is renewable. We think there are no silver bullets. We think we need all solutions on the table, with the idea that keep the focus on the problem at heart. And the problem at heart is almost every energy solution that we have today, whether it is renewable electricity, whether it is hydrocarbons, whether it is wood, is that it can't address this trilemma of making sure that energy is available, that is reliable, that is affordable, and that's environmentally sustainable, and is available for all. And this ability to move energy from point A to point B will continue to be a challenge, even in the utopian future of an all renewable energy perspective. And so fundamentally, nobody disputes the idea that climate change is real, climate change is created by humans, and we must do something to address it. And we've all seen data galore that says that the energy industry is the primary driver of the release of greenhouse gases, both CO2, methane, as well as many of the advanced greenhouse gases such as NOx and hydrofluorocarbons. And so we've got to address it. That doesn't mean we need to really put the focus on just turning around and saying there are silver bullet solutions such as renewable electricity. In fact, it is the biggest myth that renewable electricity is going to be the solution, at least for the next 5 to 7 decades worldwide. And this leads to a couple of the big issues that I think are discombobulating the entire both global North as well as global South communities. And that is the issue that we are not paying attention to global supply challenges of energy, broadly speaking, as well as global demand challenges. And the mismatch between supply and global demand that is causing energy to become unaffordable for most people around the world. And I say this from the United States, which is supposed to be one of the wealthiest nations on earth, where 1/6 of the population live in energy poverty. And that is an important statistic to remember. 1/6 of the population within the United States lives under energy poverty. And so we've got to really think about how we address supply and demand. How do we look at providing the right solutions? And that is by really focusing on the emissions and focusing on how we reduce the footprint on the environmental side for traditional energy paradigms. And at the same time, reducing the cost and the risks associated with new energy paradigms. So capacity and growth are going to be big factors as we go forward. How do we grow capacity? How do we grow things across the world? How do we do this in a distributed way? And yet find ways to have those equitable jobs that are available around the world. Two things that are huge opportunities. Even under all circumstances as we go forward, we anticipate that there will be both time-based and geography-based heterogeneities in energy supply and energy demand. And we've got to address that through both technology, but also through policies as we move forward. The second big issue, and this has been raised by my colleagues more than once today, is this issue of capital availability. Capital availability and risk tolerance have reached remarkably low levels in the last 5 to 7 years, largely because of the policy statements being driven without a basis in the realities of how energy transitions happen globally. And for anybody who thinks that there is a finite global solution to this problem, that is a big mistake. Right? This is good. We're going to have continual changes in the energy transition or the energy world as we speak. So a couple of the reasons and some of the ways we think that this can be addressed is decarbonization has to be deployed broadly. It is the most important solution that we have at hand. It is not to choose the source of energy, but address the solution of actually addressing emissions. Abate conventional emissions, lower emitting technologies such as distributed CO2 generation, and then address carbon removal technologies that can be real in terms of deployment. Perhaps some of the biggest sources, especially on the transportation side, is by looking at fuel switching. And we can see that as a big opportunity in actually being able to reduce greenhouse gases while improving quality of life. 4 sectors that must be addressed independently and importantly are transportation, industry, buildings, and materials. And we think there are different solutions in the technology space that can address those 4 challenges. I've mentioned that some of the biggest greenhouse gas emissions come from the energy sector. We've got to address this head on rather than being sort of subject to solutions such as glib solutions such as let's electrify everything. Let's try and find ways to go to renewable energy everywhere and anywhere that we can. And one of the things that I will submit is that over the next 50 to 70 years, energy demand will double globally. Most of the reductions in CO2 emissions will come between now and 2030 will come from technologies that are in the market today that are available. But to get to 2050 and to achieve many of the goals of decarbonization, not trying to turn around and saying particular solutions, but asking the question and addressing the issue of emissions, those technologies are not here even in prototype phase. We must get those to start moving down the path of innovation and invention and discovery so that we can actually advance these technologies rapidly. And as John Kerry has mentioned, many of those technologies that we need over the next 30 to 50 years that will bring us to close to net zero emissions have yet to be discovered. And so this is an opportunity for the global South and the global North to collaborate, because solutions have to be local. They have to be in the paradigm that is available in spaces where these can be applied. We think that, and the ones that the University of Houston really believes very strongly in as solutions going forward are energy efficiency. This is not a sexy topic that people like to talk about, but we think that this is perhaps one of the biggest places where we can start to get improvements in the decarbonization of the portfolio. End-use electrification, such as in transportation, is an incredible opportunity. It is perhaps the biggest opportunity to improve efficiencies for energy use. Two other things where we think there is a great opportunity in advancing the global climate and energy solution is with carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We think carbon capture is a mature technology that can be retrofitted or added on in greenfield applications. It now starts to put the focus on the emissions rather than on the production of energy. How do we utilize that CO2 and how do we sequester it safely are going to be issues that have to be done with a very strong justice lens put forward. The last one, and this we think are really important focal points, hydrogen, biofuels, and material circularity, rather than the linear materials economy that we continuously are dealing with, are great opportunities for the global South and global North to collaborate on. The solution space isn't here. The issue of extractive colonization that in the past is likely to happen if we don't put the right guardrails. And the players who will play in this extractive colonization aren't likely to be the ones that we've dealt with for the last 400 years. There are new players in place that we call the emerging superpowers of the world, the economic superpowers of the world. They are likely to be the ones who are likely to be the ones looking at extractive colonization. So I think hydrogen, material circularity, and this issue of biofuels is a place where there can be very strong collaborations to ensure that as we move forward with just energy solutions for addressing the energy trilemma, we have the ability to really advance this. And in terms of, what are the key technology sort of vectors that we think are going to be important, we think there are going to be some key areas that are going to be advanced, that are going to drive a lot of these sort of issues. They're going to be around this issue of digital transformation. The second is going to be around the issue of automation and robotics, where quality of human life can be maintained while not sacrificing on the availability of energy. Advanced manufacturing, both in terms of directed energy as well as circularity, are going to be the biggest drivers, if you will, for advancing the world. And lastly, and this is something that I think we need a true conversation about, which is how do we start to think about energy intensity? How do we start to think about GHG footprint? And what is not written here, and that is the social impact. We have routinely used life cycle analysis and techno-economic analysis around the world to drive energy policy. We believe adding a social component to that starts to address quality of life for humans, as well as jobs and economic development, are key pieces that must get addressed into life cycle analysis models. That is a place where the University of Houston is taking a significant leadership role in driving a rethink, if you will, on standard ways of assessing technology projects, energy technology projects. And I think a place where the Global South and Global North must collaborate to advance these ideas further. So with that, I want to thank both the organizers as well as Maurice for your patience and for giving me a chance to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ramana. It's really great to have a very detailed presentation. Now we're going to get into a conversation. I'll lead the conversation by asking a number of questions. And I'll also invite every participant that is online. If you've got a question, please put it on the chat. We will pick up the question and fill it to the participants and our panelists here. So thank you very much. Let me start with Buran. Buran, there's a very big question here, which is saying the global north has been accused of hypocrisy when it comes to energy transition by putting pressure on developing nations into renewables whilst they continue with fossil fuels. Do you think the fact that Europe, for example, continues to invest in gas infrastructure sends the right message to the rest of the world that transition is indeed a global climate imperative, not a political tool or simply used for more extraction from developing nations? This is a question for you, Buran.
It's a really great question. Look, I think there's certainly certain observations, valid observations during this conversation. The way I look at it is, it's not North versus South conversation. It's more like there's no one size that fits all kind of scenario here. We have different challenges across the globe, and maybe we have more challenges in certain parts of the globe than we have in other parts of the country, the globe. So the question is, how can we, break it down, if you will, the problems that we are seeing, the issues that we are seeing, how can we break it down to different regions, to different markets, and we can formulate strategies and answers that's going to address the problems in that particular area. With that said, and I think Greg made a good introduction around some of the things that United Nations wanted to kind of focus on, and there's a long list of things that we need to address, right? Now, some of those items, I think there was like 17 of them on the list. It goes all the way from, the energy, renewable energy to, the water and other sustainable life related, initiatives, right? So if you look at North America, maybe some of that will be more emphasized, some of those initiatives will be more emphasized in North America and the rest, whatever is on the list. And then if you look at, Africa or other southern part of the globe, maybe we have other areas that we need to focus on more in terms of, I think some of our colleagues pointed out that how can we have the luxury to incorporate renewables into electricity system when we don't even have the base load working efficiently and effectively? And it's a valid argument. It's a valid observation. So at that point, I think I will kind of segue the conversation to more, not North versus South, but it's more like, okay, we have other challenges, more prominent, more pressing issues and challenges that needs to be addressed in a place like Africa, for instance. Let's focus on those areas. How can we collaborate? How can we work together? And with that, how we, I'm talking about corporations, the governments, and everybody who is involved in this, global sustainable energy transition, right? How can we collaborate to get together so that we can address the issues that our colleagues pointed out in, for instance, Africa? Now, some of that maybe will be less applicable in Europe or in North America. I think that will be my approach. That will be my perspective towards the issues that we are seeing across the world. Unfortunately, it's not a homogenized, either call it system or life standards, if you will. And therefore, I think our response cannot be homogenized. If we are working on investing into renewable energy and hydrogen and maybe converting from baseload into more intermittent resources in North America, maybe it's a doable, workable solution. That does not necessarily mean that we can take this and extrapolate into everywhere in the world and say, this is the homogenized answer that's going to solve all our problems everywhere, right? So I think we have to look at it region by region and take all those observations, valid observations and concerns our colleagues shared during this call into account while formulating our answers and roadmap, if you will.
Just a quick follow-up there, because you're representing a company. The real question is does business companies in the global north have a moral obligation as the main contributors to the historical greenhouse emissions to assist South, global South, to transition and what through the business models and support and what actions do we need to take? Some of which you've already alluded, but I just want you to zero on business in particularly because of the historical contribution that they have made.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good follow-up question. Look, I think we're all in this together at the end of the day. And the way I look at it, it's not, South versus North or Europe versus Africa. There's only one planet Earth, right? So we're all in this together. We have to work together. We have to collaborate, and we have to find solutions that's going to fix all the issues we have across the world. And I think this is beyond just what a couple of corporations can contribute to. I think generally, we even see that in the developed countries, the regulatory landscape is critical. Sometimes, if you let businesses make some of those decisions, a lot of times incentives or bottom lines are driving some of those business decisions, right? But if you have the right regulatory landscape, then in essence, everyone is sort of like obligated to do certain things, or everyone is asked to make their contribution to whatever it is that we are creating this regulatory environment for. So I think the key collaboration is probably both on the north side and south side. We need to create that regulatory landscapes where the governments and the corporations are incentivized to make their contribution. It's probably beyond just incentivization, but they are sort of like required to make their contribution to the challenges that we are seeing across the world. Again, it's one planet Earth. We're all in this together. I think that will be probably the key thing that we shall highlight, because like I said, at the end of the day, if we let corporations or individuals make some of those decisions, it's generally going to come down to what's in it for me, right? That mentality. And sometimes we have to take the conversation beyond that.
All right, good. Let me go back to NJ. You've made your case very strongly. My question is that with less than 10% of global renewable energy investment reaching Africa, it is clear that Africa has a long way to go before she can fully transition to low carbon economy. What do you think the continent has to do to reach both the goals of energy security and that of low carbon economy?
Very easy. First, you don't do what Bharat says what you do. That is one planet, we're all in this together. No, it's not. The policies and how Africa has been treated, it has not been one planet, we're all in this together. Gas is growing in Europe. It's not growing in Africa. We're not together. I got 600 million people without electricity. We're not together. I got 900 million without clean cooking technologies. We're not together. You got more trillions of dollars going in from corporations that I represent. I'm a capitalist. I'm not a socialist. Corporations are investing more in European renewables, low carbon economy, and not those same corporations operate, benefit, get huge profits in Africa and don't invest that in Africa. We are not together. There are polar opposites, and the policies that have come out of the global north, looking at it from corporations and governments, we are not together. So let's dispel that notion of we are together one planet. Your greenhouse gas emissions are so high. You need to decarbonize quickly so I can industrialize. You ask the question on low carbon economy, here's how you get it. If you produce all of Africa's gas today, all the gas resources in Africa, your greenhouse gas emissions will go up by 1%. It doesn't go up. But at the same time, yes, we can use our vast renewable resources, whether you look at mini grids for villages and everything, but there is no big deal about it. I think a big part of it is fear. Fear of an African economy, fear of an African rising up with 1.4 to 1.5 billion people, and they would have to use their energy, and they are not going to wait on what? One big thing, aid, because our ancestors, our parents, they did not understand one thing. Our begging bowl is leaking. We have relied on aid so much, so all you had to do to an African government, like what South Africa did with that just energy transition that Loasi talked about, I think it's a disaster. It's a disaster. $8.5 billion to leave your resources in the ground, and then Spain came the other time with $2.2 billion, and we all singing Kumbaya. No, you need to be able to ration up your gas, and that's it. You are going to be sustainable gas. Gas is the cleanest form of fossil fuels. Germany knows it. France knows it. That's why they say it's green. So if they say we should do what the global north says, let's just do what they do, not what they tell us to do. That's how we get a low carbon economy. If you want to get reduced green, listen, the DRC carbon sink, but less than 70% of the country has any kind of electricity. Look at Mauritania. Look at the vast amounts of hydrogen that's going to come out of there. So it is not about not having it. There's nothing. I keep saying, it's like they're telling the skinny kid in class to lose weight, while the fat guy keeps grabbing all the burger and all the pap and the oxtail, and he's telling the skinny kid, you go lose some weight. And like, I got nothing to lose. I'm already anorexic. No. I mean, listen, this is like telling me Winehouse to go to rehab. It's already bad. We need to ramp up energy in Africa, and that low carbon energy, it can exist. But we have to look at financing. And yes, I end with this. $2.3 trillion in Africa in private wealth. Africa needs to create an enabling environment which will break down those barriers and start ramping up African financing to finance young Africans, especially women, to really grab a lot. Do you realize that African women, Black women, are still the last hired and the first fired in the renewables industry? And also, you realize that Black women financing, even of the less than 2% that we get, Professor, you're very nice to say 10%, it's less than 2%. That less than 2%, what has gone to Black African women is a shame. And you're talking about ESG and sustainability. Where is the social and the governance in it? I mean, more Black women are not even receiving anything. You can see the amount of mails I get from Black women looking for financing to do mini grids, $500,000, $1 million, mini grids in villages. It's not happening. And you want to talk about, oh, we all in this together. When you were eating and getting fat and having all industrialization, we were not together. Now when the trouble hits down, we're not together. And for me, it's like, I know an African minister, when he was enjoying as a minister, he kept enjoying. The day he got fired, he said, hey man, we got fired. No, you got fired. I'm still here. So that's it. So they need to take care of their problems and we'll take care of us.
You may to create an enabling environment for investment to come. Do you think really, as Africans, we have made a clear case for investment to come to Africa?
No, we've not, and that's a travesty. We've not. Number one, we start by visas. There's no reason. It's easy for Borat to fly into Africa, and I cannot fly into another African country. You start with getting rid of visas. You start looking at incentives. One of the most beautiful thing that Borat said was, when you talk about regulation and incentives, sometimes corporations just look around incentives. We've not created incentive to say, if you are investing in renewables in Africa, And if African countries start saying, if you invest in renewables, we are going to incentivize those African companies to invest in renewables with Africa. You don't have to have 1 billion, 2 billion. It could be 1 million or 5 million or $10 million. We have to look at how we deal with transparency issues that Leozi talked about. But we also have to deal with that doing business, how you create a business, open it up fast, taxes, bring down taxes, expand the tax base so that people can get out there and drive it. But we need to encourage entrepreneurship. We need to embrace success in Africa and nourish it, encourage it, promote it. Let's not buy into this culture that if somebody is trying to get rich or somebody is working hard and trying to build a business to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning, get out there and work and do it, is something bad. There is dignity in work. There is dignity in entrepreneurship. That environment we need to depoliticize energy quickly. And that is my criticism of our own African leaders, how we take things. Look at our approval ratings when it comes to approving projects. It takes so long. It should not take so long to approve a project than the time you need to build that project. A lot of projects are stuck in the hands of regulators and in the hands of bureaucrats. Sign, baby, sign. Approve those projects, let people get out there and work. And this applies to renewables, it applies to infrastructure, it applies to fossil fuel projects. We Africans have to take an obligation. So Professor, I tell you this, mirrors are not just to reflect what you see, mirrors are to correct what you see. We need to correct what we see and what we're doing wrong.
Thank you very much. I think that's let me move on to the academics now. We've had very strong views from the practitioners. Lozi, when you come after NJ, you have to add a little bit more from an academic point of view. When it comes to energy transition, what do you think Africa's competitive advantage is, and what needs to be done to leverage this? That's a question.
Thanks, Prof. Look, I think we certainly have one advantage that we haven't really explored, and that is the youth of this continent. Africa is a very young continent, and I think if we can get our young people working, if we can get our young people innovating, and of course this needs a lot of support and creating an enabling environment for them to be able to thrive. I think we certainly have a huge advantage in that. You know, I can give you examples of you know, solutions that have come out of this continent, which unfortunately didn't really get to see commercialization. So if you think of sort of the leaders in electric vehicles, one of the first truly functional and fully electric vehicles was built here in South Africa, and that was the Leaf. But where do you find them now? That project is practically dead in the water because we did not have an enabling environment, you know, for those entrepreneurs to thrive and to be able to commercialize globally. We built the Purple Bed modular reactor in South Africa over many years, billions invested in that project. But where is it now? It's dead in the water, and we are now buying the same technology back into, or trying to buy the technology back into South Africa. So we need to make sure that we tap into our resources of young people and support them and create an enabling environment. And of course, this goes all the way, you know, through from education to making sure that we can incubate businesses and making sure we hold their hand as they try and commercialize these projects. And of course, our abundant natural resources. You know, the new world is going to need lithium. Africa has got lithium. It's going to need platinum. Africa's got platinum. And we need to make sure we own those resources, I think, first and foremost, that we don't have this, you know, issue of corporations just coming into the continent and extracting and we get no value out of that. So we need to make sure we own those resources, we refine locally, we manufacture all of these panels, we manufacture the wind turbines and everything else that goes with it within the continent. By the time anything that comes out of the ground of the continent, by the time it leaves, it needs to be a final product, fully value-added product. We need to stop becoming a market. We need to become producers. But all of that is going to need policy, and legislation that's going to be enabling. And it's going to need a backbone from our leadership to make sure we make those hard decisions. To say to a corporation, if you're going to come and come and get our copper, you are not going to export it as cake. By the time it leaves this continent, it needs to live in a solar panel. So we can do that, but we need strong leadership that's going to take those bold decisions. And there'll be pushback, of course, once you start telling people, look, you can't do ABC. But we have to do that. We have to take those tough decisions. And I think also very important in terms of what we also have as a sort of an advantage. We in a fortunate position that Africa has already set up, for example, on the electricity side, we've already set up power pools. And this would be great, I think, to make sure that we interconnect these power pools, to be able to leverage off each other's strengths. If somebody in the DRC is producing hydroelectricity, we need to be able to leverage, that hydro for the entire continent. Or if it's in Ethiopia, with a great Renaissance dam, we need to be able to leverage and interconnect all of these different power pools. If somebody's got gas, whether it be Namibia or Angola or Mozambique, we need to be able to leverage off of that as a continent. So I think we can and should work together. We need to start looking at regional integration more seriously and stop working, in our little silos. Countries like South Africa in particular has made big blunder of isolating ourselves from the rest of the continent. When it came to, for example, the issue of that JETP funding, because the message that's sent out to the rest of the continent is that, we are the special children. We did not, approach this from a regional or a continental perspective. We were looking at ourselves, and we completely isolated ourselves from the rest of the continent. So until that mindset changes, we're not going to be able to move forward. I think I will stop there, Prof, for now.
Thank you very much. Very, very insights that you've raised, Lwazi. Let me invite the members of the participants. Write down your questions. Nicole is collating them for me so that I can ask. Let's go to Ramana. He's an academic also. So just to get a sense where we are. Let me ask you maybe a little bit of a difficult question here. Despite increased variable energy investment, bitter winters, an ongoing war in Ukraine, and the dwindling Russian gas supplies, global North remains relatively unscathed in terms of energy security. You just looked at the energy security we're experiencing here in our country. Are there any key lessons that the South should be taking from this? I mean, in the midst of the war, in the midst of all the uncertainty, your energy security seems to be reasonably in place.
Well, I think one of the key lessons is there are no silver bullets, right? I think our over-reliance on any one given technology solution is a disaster. And Europe figured that out, right? Their idea, for instance, Germany, somebody was mentioning about solar panels on every rooftop. They pretty much did that, but the capacity factor is 1%. You do not produce enough electricity to run anything beyond a few light bulbs by putting all those solar panels. So trying to come up with solutions agnostic of the reality and the pragmatism that is required in the energy world, if it's ideological, you're going to fail, right? And so having this portfolio approach is going to be important. And that's when I think Africa has an incredible opportunity. And I don't want to, again, we talk about Africa as though it's monolithic. It has got so many different varieties to it, so many different geographies that are associated with it. There are so many different opportunities that are so local and must get addressed. And I think the whole idea has been this notion that somehow energy can be created into a single large food chain is perhaps the biggest fallacy that's come out of this war that we've seen, this uncertainty that we've seen that have come out of both the COVID challenge that we've had, and then following that, many of these wars. I don't think by any means that the global North is in a secure energy space going forward. We are destined for significant volatilities. And that's largely because we've let ideology get ahead of pragmatism. Big lesson for the continent of Africa to take home and find the right solutions for the geographically diverse places is forget ideology, focus on pragmatic approaches with the idea that don't make the same mistakes that the global north has made. For instance, putting in solutions that don't account for the environmental consequences will lead to environmental justice issues, will lead to issues of not just energy equity, but environmental inequity and global and health challenges. And I think if I were to sort of reflect on this and say, take the best that the global north has to offer, but find the right solutions for the particular geographies, particular assets that you have in each part of Africa. And to consider that you're going to have a global network within the continent of Africa for every different form of energy is again a fallacy. Do not buy that argument. I think the solutions can be local. They must be local. They must address local needs and provide local job and economic opportunities. And I think that's the paradigm shift that must happen. We're seeing that happen even in industries as complex as the chemicals manufacturing, that you can actually go modular, you can do these intensified, and you can actually make specialized products that are actually better and more appropriate for certain geographies than others.
Thank you. That's a very good tip there. Diversify your portfolio all the time. That's an old financial advice. Just another question, please. Questions are coming through here. Nicole, you help me out here. But there's one phenomenon I've seen in South Africa in particular. Maybe AJ, you can give us a very good some perspective. Very vociferous NGOs that have developed in Africa, very vociferous. Whenever there's a big project, whether it's a Pulprada whether there's even there was a time where fracking came in, very vociferous, and they take corporations to court, delay you for 2-3 years, and it takes a lot of money, and then the corporation says, I'm out of here. What's this phenomena of these NGOs? What is your take, NJ?
You see, the beauty of a democratic system is that you would always be faced by this. But I think that the NGOs is most, and Professor, you're very, very nice, but I say Western NGOs have really made Africa, a target on Africa as their main stake. They have funded campaigns, they've funded attacks, personal attacks on people. It is outrageous. It doesn't help where we are. Yet, I mean, I've been protested on going to Cape Town. I've seen Shell's seismic projects being said they go and kill all fishes in South Africa and poison everybody, and the misinformation. I think it doesn't even help the climate movement itself, because you have to be able to put facts that are out there. But I think everyday Africans are seeing people coming from Europe, going into Cape Town, going to wineries, drinking wine, and then come out and then push out big money and saying that they need to block projects in South Africa. The Brupada project has been protested on. But let's even move outside of South Africa. Mozambique, they had big delays where Friends of the Earth went out after the UK government for financing that. They've said they have Bill McKibben out of the United States now has a whole big movement to stop EACOP, the East African Crude Oil Pipelines. They're saying if you finance and if that pipeline goes ahead and produce 240,000 barrels of petrol, that will be Armageddon. It will be the end of every climate issue in the world, because that would just end the world. Let's stop it. 240,000 barrels. The United States produces 12 million barrels. So you mean 1.8% equivalent of what the United States produce would end the world? This is the kind of ridiculous stuff that is being perpetuated. And most importantly, a lot of Africans, you're giving jobs and they're being driven into this. And the NGOs have done an amazing job. You got to give them credit to use a judiciary, which South Africa, for example, has done a bad job at it. You've not passed regulation. You need an upstream regulatory environment that guarantees stability and sanctity in that region. When you leave it up, you let judges and NGOs decide this, and that hurts the development. So today, even your renewable programs cannot even go forward because the NGOs are challenging some of the renewable programs and projects that are being put out there. So they forget that they have lights in Europe. Africans don't have lights in South Africa, but their money is going at it. I think I used to believe civil society, this idea of liberal constitutional and human rights, it was a betterment of people. But right now, if that has been turned because of climate, it has been turned as if it's been a little bit colonial, and they should be very careful about the backlash. And the silent majority of Africans are not loving this. There is a silent majority out there. If they think because you sit and you drink latte and you drink it and you drink your almond milk and walk up your 12th floor office, that's the world the world is. No, the world is bigger than that. There's a silent majority that is watching. And I'm saying this because I started my career as an activist with Amnesty International and worked for the United Nations in Darfur. So I'm not very impressed by what my former socialists have been doing.
But NJ, I want to sort of come back and rebut some of that, right?
Can you go ahead now? I'm going to allow it free for all now.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to bring up what I agree with you. If we have Western NGOs and the global North NGOs dominating the conversations, you have a problem. But I believe there are a significant number of sort of local NGOs that have also taken up some of these issues. And I think they bring it up because there are not appropriate safeguards and guardrails to ensure that some of the environmental justice issues that have crept into almost every energy project that has happened worldwide will happen again in Africa. And I think this is an important thing. I think we should not throw out the baby out with the bathwater. We should be careful about how we paint NGOs. And I think you did a good job. You identified the right organizations to look at. They should be not preaching, but I think you need to be looking at local content, local voices to be heard so that we avoid a lot of the mistakes of the past. I think we need to have a much stronger set of guardrails that protect the environment, that protect the long-term investment of efforts that are going to be happening within the continent of Africa and must be put on a fast track. And finding ways to fast track it, I think, are important, but not at the cost of the people.
Professor, you need to buy my book. I talk about local NGOs that are doing good job. Niger Delta, Nigeria. We saw what happened to Ken Saro-Wiwa. Horrible. Yep. We've seen a lot of degradations where oil spills have not been treated well in Africa, but when it happened in the Gulf Coast in the United States, they were fine. That needs to be done. Local content, empowering Africans, NGOs need to speak out and look communities, ensuring that there's corporate social responsibility, education, revenue management, on how some of these resources, for example, some of the money that comes out of oil projects or gas projects, create trust funds, 10% go into local communities. NGOs should be looking at that. But to chokehold the Propelder project, South Africa needs about 4,000 megawatts of electricity today. The Propelder project today would give us about 2,800 to 3,000 megawatts. That basically brings load shedding by 70 to 80%. Can't get done because you're stuck in cost. Shell, you know, to that 80% of the Orange Basin is in South Africa. 20% is in Namibia. Namibia has seen some of the largest gas discoveries right now in the world since Brussels. It's in Namibia by Total Energies and Shell. The companies that we're kicking out of South Africa are having massive discoveries around the neighboring countries because NGOs just know one thing. They'll choke you. They will not let you even shoot seismic. They will not let you even drill around South Africa. They will not let you do anything. So what happens? Chevron exits South Africa. Exxon exits South Africa. Gallup and other investors keep exiting because they're not ready to go in these long battles. Those kind of NGOs are those kind of NGOs like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. They are not Friends of the Earth. They're certainly not Friends of Africa. Those are the ones that we don't want. We want those NGOs that are local communities, activists, holding powerful people like Prof accountable so that they don't do injustice in Africa.
Thank you very much. I've got a question here. Somebody says we're talking global north and global south, but China is using coal, is going ahead with fossil fuels, and at the same time also developing extensive renewable program. What's your comments around here, Puran? What's your take?
You're muted, Buran.
Sorry about that. The typical mistake, speaking while being on mute. Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I think that's the kind of point I was trying to, make earlier or come across. I think, the circumstances are not homogeneous across the world, right? The resources we have in certain parts of the country and how we, the political landscape and the regulatory landscape we have, within different parts of the world is not the same. So I think as we are navigating through this dynamics, we have to really just kind of take that local approach and say, okay, what is the best action here? What is the best kind of roadmap we can put together to kind of help us get out of the challenges that we are facing here, as well as go to where we want to go, whether that's sustainable renewable energy, whether making sure that we have access to clean energy, access to light, water, the energy security, right? So looking at China, I think one thing that that probably impresses me is that they are taking that local approach and they're trying to take advantage of the resources they have available, and they're trying to take advantage of the population strength they have, and then trying to make the best out of it. And I will say maybe 50 years ago, not a lot of people talked about China as being a superpower or a country that may have, that much influence in the political landscape. But now I think, with all the decisions, the localized decisions they made in terms of what's going to work for them, what's not going to work for them, I think they are probably in a unique situation where they have that influence in the regulatory and political landscape in the world. These people pay attention to what they are doing and what they are saying. I think one maybe lesson learned from that is that, okay, how can we take that in mindset, apply it to other parts of the world where we are seeing sometimes similar challenges, maybe sometimes different challenges. Like if you take Africa as an example, right? I'm not an African expert, so I don't want to be disrespectful to Wazi and NJ who are on the call, right? So, but just as an outsider, they can see that there are a series of challenges that need to be addressed within the continent of Africa. And even if you break it down to like certain regions, and I'm sure that the issues that we're seeing is not homogeneous across the continent. What we may need to focus on in South Africa is maybe different than what we may need to focus on other parts of the continent in terms of, again, those basic, the needs, the human rights that we may need. So anyway, I kind of digress from China back to, the conversation we had about Africa and in other parts of the country. But I think that will be my kind of, perspective towards what I'm seeing with China. I'm really impressed with how they are taking that local approach and understanding their strengths and weaknesses and trying to come up with a roadmap, whether it's an energy related or prosperity related roadmap that's gonna help them get out of the challenges that they used to face and get to the places that they're trying to get to.
Great. That's a very important observation here. There's
If
a
I can
question.
add something to that.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Jump in. Lois, if you want to jump in, also just
Yeah.
jump in.
So very quickly, China and India.
Okay.
India is the other one that you got to look at. A very large amount of coal used for electricity production, but also building the renewable efforts. But also when you start to look at investment in Africa, in the continent of Africa, China and India are probably the dominant players globally. And it's not by aid that they're coming in, but truly coming in to do economic development. And that's where you need to watch the supply chains and watch where those minerals are going. I think this is going to be an important issue, whether it's gas, whether it's oil, whether it's critical minerals. India and China are certainly very closely working with many of the different African countries to build effective pipelines of those materials going to those countries for exploitation. And I think that's a place where there has to be renewed focus rather than just on Western Europe and North America as being the ones sort of building these pipelines to extract minerals and bring back finished goods.
Are you suggesting, like we said at the beginning, that maybe the new colonizers are not going to be the ones 200-300 that came for gold, and it could be different ones? Eh?
Absolutely. I think you got a different set of colonial powers emerging and perhaps coming in under a very different guise than ESG and aid funding.
Yeah, you just touched on something I wanted to touch on the China issue. One being the supply chains. China is not only, centralizing global, or at least renewable energy manufacturing in China. They are making sure that they've got access to all the minerals of the future, basically, across the world, including Africa. And they've really put a stranglehold on the supply chains. So as the world is transitioning, it's quite clear China has got the full supply chain concentrated in China. So you can't do anything outside of China right now. And then also, I think, as a final, I suppose, parting shot really is, we need to be pragmatic in how we are approaching this situation. And this is exactly what China is doing. Yes, they are the world's biggest manufacturer of renewable energy products, but also China every single year is putting out more new power stations, coal-fired power stations every single year. They're building more than what South Africa has in its capacity, in its entirety. Every single year, China, we've got more than 50 gigawatts of coal-fired power coming online. And South Africa only has, 45, give or take, 46 gigawatts worth of coal power. So yes, they are, driving renewable energy technologies, and they're the biggest producers and all of that. They've centralized and basically got a chokehold on the world when it comes to that. But they haven't stopped, putting out coal-fired power. And that's how we should be sort of pragmatic in our approach going forward.
Yeah. So why did it get clapped like we get clapped when we get any coal power station?
Well, one, I think, is leadership. I think when leadership has got one clear purpose, and they make decisions and act on those decisions very quickly, you avoid the situation of the dilly-dallying that we do. And we've seen that, in fact, I think very good examples, even in our own backyard, countries like Namibia, when basically, there's an anecdote, that says, for example, the president, when they discovered this, oil and gas of Namibia, called together, the energy ministry, the environmental ministry, sat them around the table and said, we're going to find solutions, but we need to develop. We're not going to stop development because the environmentalists are, fighting this battle. And if we are going to be, taken to court and all of that, we are going to go as one voice, as the government, instead of having one ministry doing one thing and the other ministry trying to do something else.
Great. I'm quite open. If anyone wants to jump in, you're welcome to do that. Raman, there's a question about your diversified portfolio, but the question was, I know that the next series is probably going to talk about financing, but you can talk about how do you finance this diversified portfolio, because finance is a big issue.
Yeah, and I completely agree, right? And I think part of this is looking at mega scale projects versus looking at small scale projects, such as creating a microgrid type of setup, right? Being able to have local generation of renewable energy, local storage, controlling that within limited geographies, and thereby building up that infrastructure. And I'm just giving you an example of an electrification microgrid. Similarly, we can start to approach other things such as industrial production, whether we're looking at all those things that you need to do with the energy, being able to come back and produce that critical minerals. How do we start thinking locally? How do we start thinking modularly? How do we start to look at how do we get the best efficiency in a distributed network rather than in a centralized network? The whole industrial revolution, the whole approach that Western Europe and the United States have taken have, because of the ways of their absence of resources, they have tried to build up on centralized facilities. How do you break that paradigm and go towards local facilities, local opportunities? One other example outside of the microgrid, if you want to really look at, is the whole bio-based economy. Moving solids from one place to another is the most expensive part of a bio-based economy. If I can do that locally, if I can do local modular handling of solids, be able to convert that to valuable product locally, that have changed the economy. And those fundamentally take much smaller investments. The return on investment is a lot faster, and being able to show success is a lot easier. And so for those reasons, thinking completely different rather than centralized economies, looking at distributed economies is the way I think Africa can advance as a continent in a much more rapid way. When you look at what China has done, what India has done, they have bought into the idea of centralized economies. They have lost the value of what they truly have in terms of their distributed resources, both in terms of human resources, but also in terms of where they've got the cheapest products available. And that's the reason why technology has advanced today far enough. I think looking at this distributed production, distributed manufacturing, distributed value chains could be a game changer.
Thank you very much. We're left with 10 minutes. I'll give you each 1 minute to give you your parting shot. And then after that, I'll hand over to Dan to close this meeting. Loaz, let's start with you, and then Puran and Raman, and then NJ concludes. Let's go ahead. Your parting shot now.
Thanks, Prof. I think it's a parting shot. I think for me, it's a comment I already made, which is if we're talking an energy transition, nothing can be done, no discussions about us without us.
Thank you. Thank you. Puran.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the key takeaway, at least for me, is that climate change is real and we need to do something about it. And everything we're talking about, I think is relevant in that context. One point that I tried to make earlier, we're all in this together in the sense that we should be. And if we are not, then we should, right? So I think NJ made that clarification. I could agree to a certain extent that maybe we're not necessarily behaving that way, or it's not necessarily working out that way as of today, but we have to, right? We have to be in this together, because unless Elon Musk can figure out a way to take us to Mars, this is it. This is what we got, and we gotta figure out a way to work together, and hopefully we will achieve that. I believe that.
Yeah, great. Ramanand.
So there isn't any single thing called the energy transition. Each of us is going to have a different pathway to get to the energy transition, work through the energy pathway, get to ultimately what the goal is going to be, affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy for all. The global north is going to do it in a very different way. We have stranded resources, stranded assets that are worth trillions of dollars. The solutions that are going to come up from the global north are going to address that economic reality of stranded assets going to waste. Those are not the solutions that the global south needs. There are clearly, if we set the paradigm right and turn around and say, we need to look at how do we look at local solutions for local people with local input. I think this comes back to the whole issue of justice. That is the only way to move forward. And if we make the same mistakes that the global north has made, along with what China and India have made in the global south, we would have completely failed in working this energy transition the right way.
Thank you very much, Ramana. NJ.
Thank you so much. I close with this. Climate change and energy poverty, as I said, are two sides of the same coin. But we all have a job to do. This is not a job of the global north or the global south. It is something that Martin King Jr. described, one of my greatest heroes. He said the arc of a moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It doesn't bend by itself. It is everyday people that help shape it that way. We have an amazing opportunity to shape a world that we can truly see a rainbow coalition, a rainbow nations, a rainbow universe where everybody comes together to fix our problems. As tough, as difficult as it is, but this is a world where we've been able to put the man on the moon, and we've been able to get Elon go to Mars, but we can still find ways to create that just, equitable, and fair society. And that starts with energy, because when that young girl in the Gambia can read at night, then we know we're doing it. When you have COVID ventilators in a real hospital in Tanzania or Uganda, and there is energy to save those vaccines, then we're doing justice for everybody that deserves it. Without that, climate action is going to be a tough one to get. And we all have a role to play to get there.
Absolutely. We all have to, I use the word all hands on deck, all hands on deck when it comes to this existential challenge, threat to mankind. And whilst we obviously don't emit too much CO2s, but we have seen here also in South Africa for the first time floods that flooding the whole of KwaZulu-Natal. So all of us needs to have our hands on deck. And I think what I'm getting here is that this is not just global south, global north problem. It's all of us needs to focus on it. And that's the aim of this series that we started. Today was just to set the scene and have that debate. We're going to be moving on into the next series that deals with financing, technology. I think the second one that is coming is repurposing the legacy projects, assets that we have. And then we're also going to talk about skills development. So there's a number of series, so please inform as many people as possible. And what I'm very pleased here is not we have got over 33 countries here represented here. So it's wonderful to see that. I wish that we should have more, and I'm sure as the momentum gains on this project, it will continue. You will see on the chat there all the information. You can go in there. At this moment, Dan, I'm handing over to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Maurice. What an incredible discussion. I would describe as frank, transparent. I don't know if that's redundant, but at times provocative.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that's necessary and important to talk about this subject. I came away with a much richer a sense of urgency about what needs to be done. And that too is good. What needs to be done about this trilemma, this set of issues about reliability, about responsibility, and about affordability? And it's the combination of issues. I came away, although at times, as we know, it was provocative, I think we saw some pretty interesting pathways that connect the global north and the global south, that help us to think about the West and the East when it comes to questions about China and other parts of the world. Connecting points related to things like youth, to technology and innovation, and to education, the reason why we're here. So this has been fantastic. I don't know, honestly, I don't know many webinar types of things that have managed to keep my attention for a full 2 hours, but this one has. Almost like a Netflix series. I got a cliffhanger here because the next one I'm even much more interested in doing. But before we close, I want to thank the impact community leaders, because this is an initiative of the impact community, which for us, impact communities are super important as drivers of impact, as connectors of schools and people in our community. And without the leaders of the impact communities, and I want to especially thank the leaders of this one, this doesn't get possible. You already know Maurice and you already know Wazi. You already know Greg from the start, but I want to make sure to recognize Sarah Craig, who's the program manager for energy transition at the Rotterdam School of Management, and her colleague Yasser Gyasi, who is not only an associate professor, but also the academic director of smart energy at the Erasmus Center at University of Erasmus. So it's the three schools. We want to make sure, although they've been working in the background and helping to frame this, we recognize the Rotterdam School of Management, Wits Business School, and of course the University of Houston's Bauer School in Texas here in the United States. So thank you to each of the impact community leads and their schools. And thanks to everyone that's been able to join us and to help engage in this provocative discussion. I've been following the chat and it's been just amazing. I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Julie, and again, thanks to all, especially you, Maurice. You've been quite patient throughout too. I noticed that there are times where I know you had much to say, and you're just an amazing leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who joined today. The next session in this series will be on June 27th at 10 a.m. EDT, 1600 CEST. And as mentioned earlier, the session is recorded and we will be sending the recording to all registered participants in the next few days. And thank you all that joined us for our first session in the Powering the Energy Transition, A Tale of Two Hemispheres. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next session.